They're big, strong, macho, aggressive, sexual, intelligent, dominating. Those are words that are used to describe the reptilians that you find in UFO research, and not the kinds of things that you want to find. In fact, it's probably the worst thing that we could find, truthfully. But what John was afraid of was that because of his silence on the issue and the silence of other researchers, that other people had been spreading a lot of information about reptilians that he felt was over the top. And this is an advertisement I found in a magazine just recently that is advertising Microsoft Office something or other. Got a reptilian in an executive suit. And I'm not going to get into that very much, other than to say that there has been a lot of publicity and a lot of information on the internet and on television about reptilians are in charge of the world, and they shapeshift into people who are the leaders of countries, and they are actually pulling all the strings. And I have to say that I never found that. I never found, John never found that. Barbara Lamb never found that. So we just have to go by for what we know, and that's what we were going to talk about, rather than, getting negative about what other people might be saying. So Barbara and I had to give that presentation in Laughlin a year ago, March, by ourselves, without the material that John was going to provide, because he died before we could even see the material. All we had was the outline of what we were going to talk about, and he was going to talk about his case studies and his perceptions, some of which I knew the perceptions, but I didn't have access to his case studies, and neither did Barbara. And in fact, all that material went into his estate and got tied up in legalities. And it was just by chance that somehow, I guess someone's looking after me, I got word that there was one of John's subjects who had had reptilian experiences, who wanted to talk to me, who would be willing to talk to me. So I called her, and I explained what we were doing, and she said, I know that John was working on this project. And John was working a lot of projects all at one time. This wasn't the only thing he was focusing his attention on. So she said, I'll talk to you. So I said, well, tell me what your experience was. And she says, well, most of my experiences have been with grays, and this was quite different. She says, it was in the middle of the night. I was taken into a dark cave. It was moist, and it was not like the sanitary places that the grays take you. It was dirt on the floor. I was strapped into a reclining chair, and I was sexually assaulted by a reptilian. And the next morning I woke up with 3 needle marks on my abdomen in a triangular shape. I called John Mack immediately, because she had been working with John, and I told him what happened, what I recalled. He had a session with her in which she was able to remember more of the details. And as she's telling me this story, I'm thinking, I've heard this story so many times. I've had cases exactly like this, where reptilians take a woman into a cave and have sexual intercourse. And this isn't the first time I'd heard that story. Of course, she didn't know anybody else that had such a thing happen to her. And when she told John the story, John's reaction was, well, it sounds like this happened in another reality. And, you know, the reptile, I mean, that could be like an archetype. And so he was an intellectual and a psychiatrist, and he had a tendency to think in those ways as his first reaction. And her response was, John, I was raped by a reptilian. And for me, it was real. And here's the marks. And he says, okay, I'm sorry, because John treated his subjects like co-researchers. And that's why they liked him so much. He honored their perceptions. But when he wrote about it, he had to write like a scientist, which he was. So, you know, finally he agreed that, yeah, well, okay, you're right. For you, this was very real. And a lot of the discussion that I had with him about all of this was, you know, what is real and what is not real? How much of alien abduction stories happen in our reality, and how much happen in another dimension or reality? Because a lot of this does seem like there's some other reality to it. Had cases where people actually saw a dimensional doorway open, you know, in their room at night, and out came beings that then took them into this dimensional portal and took them someplace else. A lot of this seems other dimensional. And the question is, if it's other dimensional, if this happens in another dimension, then can we call it real? And John and I both agreed that we didn't think it made a difference, that if it happens in our dimension or somebody else's dimension, it's still real, especially for the person who experienced it. And however, you know, legally speaking, it'd be hard to prosecute somebody that did something wrong in another dimension. Okay, so we got some ways to go before we can accept all of that. The book that John and I were interested in was a book that was written by a medical doctor. Nope, that's another reptilian. Just to show you that there's a lot of variations here. This guy right here, Dr. Richard Strassman. He's a medical doctor who lives in Taos, New Mexico, but from 1990 to 1995, he conducted a 5-year research study at the University of New Mexico in Albuquerque under the auspices of the U.S. Food and Drug Administration, the U.S. Drug Enforcement Administration, and with funding from the National Institute of Drug Abuse and the U.S. National Institute of Health. This guy got heavy-duty support for doing a study on a hallucinogenic drug on volunteers, more than 700 volunteers. And this is the first study on a hallucinogenic drug that was permitted by the U.S. government since the 1960s, when all of that was ruled illegal. How he got permission to do this, I don't know. And probably we wouldn't even be aware that the study took place, but for the fact that he wrote a book. And this is the book. I recommend it to you if you haven't seen it yet. It's called DMT, the spirit molecule. And DMT stands for a molecule called N,N-dimethyltryptamine. Okay? This little molecule, turns out, is extraordinarily powerful in causing a hallucinogenic altered state in which the people who take it claim that they left their consciousness left their body and went someplace else and communicated with beings.